One thing I've learned from the time I've spent learning about these brethren, and especially Lewis Hayden, is that they did not see Masonry as instrumental. It was not something that they participated in order to get something else done. It was a good in and of itself. They invested their hopes and dreams in Masonry. They believed its bonds could knit together communities shattered by slavery, war, and hardship. They believed that Masonry's bonds could even be a balm to the wound of racial division.
I'm Beverly Morgan Welch. I'm the Executive Director of the Museum of African American History in Boston and Nantucket, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this historic occasion. For tonight's program, we have All Men, Free and Brethren, Prince Hall, and Black Freemasonry. So it is a privilege to ask to come to the podium Reuben H. Mead. He is the 70th Grand Master of Prince Hall Grand Lodge. 70th! I just want you to get the point here that this organization has been around longer than any other. And we are so very delighted to welcome you back to the home that you built.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor for me as a Prince Hall Mason and as a man of color and as the 78th most watchful Grand Master, following in his footsteps of so good a man as Prince Hall. We tried over the years to keep his legacy forever, as long as we travel this earth. We'll always cherish his memory. I just want to give you, if you look at the program, you might see a little brief bio on me as a person. But first, I must let you know that I get involved in this Masonic part of my life in the year 1984. I was introduced into John T. Hilton Lodge. And John T. Hilton was one of past Grand Master. He served once for 2 years, and then he returned this year. He served for 10 years. And I told my fellow brother that I am going to be the next John T. Hilton. So I stood here. I stood here in front of you this evening to say thank you to Prince Hall Masons. And I'm so proud to look around and see all the brothers and sisters of the Prince Hall family. Please just raise your hand in recognition that came out here this evening. Thank you so much. This is what we do. And I must go back to say that I get started in this Grand Lodge from the subordinate lodge by none other than my good friend, my true friend, and my brother, past most watchful Grand Master Leslie Lewis, who is now the best CCFC that any Grand Master could ever have. About 6-7 weeks ago, he called me and said, Grand Master, I want you to meet a young lady by the name of Beverly Morgan Welch. I said, I know her. I said, she spoke on Prince Hall history 2011 Memorial Day service in Arlington. I said, she's a great speaker. I got to meet her. So we drove down here and we went to our office, and I'm telling you, we talked history that day, and I tried to do that in my lodge too, know some history. We spoke about Prince Hall, we spoke about John T. Hilton, we spoke about everyone that we could remember that day, and it was great. And we decided that we'd put this program together. And from there on, I just stand back. I ask past Grandmaster Lewis, take care of all his and he just replied to me what happened, how things went, and so we set this program for today. And I'm very, very happy and delighted to welcome each and every one of you this evening to this great program that was set here this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's an honor and a pleasure, first of all, for me being here this evening, and I'm here to tell you a story. I started out in Freemasonry in 1973, and my journey went on from there. But I was always one of those Masons who was curious as to who Prince Hall was, what did he look like, what did he do, and for many, many, many years, there have been so many stories, so many books have been written. We wanted something that was factual. And it just so happened, and I thought it was in 2001, but as I think about it, it was in the spring of 2002. Walter R. Butler III was the 63rd Grand Master at the time. We were at a cabinet meeting at the temple, and my position in the temple at that time was I was the junior Grand Warden, which is at the bottom of the totem pole of the elected officers. And we got a phone call that evening. The phone call came from the Grand Secretary to our office. The Grand Master answered the phone and said, "Brother Lewis, take that call." I took the call. It was a person by the name of Donald Yakovon. He said that he told me who he was. I had no idea who he was. He told me he was from Harvard University. And I said, "Well, sir, what can I do for you?" He said, "Well, I'm here with a group of historians, and we would like to write a true history of African American Freemasonry in America." And I'm saying to myself, this must be a godsend, because this is something that I and many, many others have been looking for years. So I talked with Donald, and we made arrangements for him and his group to come by within the next week or two, and we met at the temple. The Grand Master was there, I was there, and the senior Grand Warden, whose name was Napoleon Burton. The Grand Master then appointed me as the Historical Committee Chairperson to kind of oversee what was going on with these historians and putting something together. So we met, we talked. This was in 2002. All of a sudden, here it is, 2003, 2004. In 2004, I meet another great historian, Professor Peter Hinks. And I also meet a young man, a young black fellow, who was writing his thesis on African American Freemasonry in America. His name was Cherno Sese. I think he was from Ohio. Ohio, yeah. Yeah. Cherno came in, and this young man was he had so much going for him. He had so much history in his mind. And as time went on, the committee got bigger. We had lots of historians, about 6 or 8. Beverly Morgan Welch was one of those that was with us when we first met, and things just kind of took off from there. Professor Hinks used to write manuscripts and so forth, and he'd give them to me. And in 2005, when I became Grand Master, I took it down to the Conference of Grand Masters, it's a conference held every year in a certain state where every single sitting Prince Hall Grand Master has to appear. And it's like a conference of what we're doing with our lives and our organizations. Well, at that time there, I was one of the youngest Grand Masters, and so they allowed me to get up and I read the manuscripts that Professor Hinks had put together. Well, I'll tell you what, it took me about 12 minutes to read it, but you could hear a pin drop. They were so interested, because they've never ever heard anything like this before. Everything was factual. It wasn't something that you thought that you might know. And that brings up something that I just want to tell you this. I read a history of Prince Hall, and somebody told me that in the history it said that he worked on the train as a ticket conductor or something. Now, those are the kind of stories that are not true. Definitely not true, you know? But after I spoke at the Conference of Grand Masters, what they did was they asked me if I would be the chairperson of their historical committee. That's in 2005. So I came back to Massachusetts, I told everybody what was going on, and every year after that, the committees, the historians and I, we met, we were putting things together, and things were moving on. Stanley Kantorowicz was involved. He got involved in it with him and Peter, and it just started to move. Then all of a sudden, Peter went, and he was doing his work with Stephen, and I think it was in either 2011 or 12, Peter, Beverly, and I met in Beverly's office with a young man from Cornell University Press. We talked and we talked and we talked, and before we left there, this young man said that Cornell University Press would publish the book. Well, I'm saying to myself, here it is, we started in 2002, 10 years later, 2012. But we're steadily working on this book because we want it to be something that every Prince Hall Mason will be proud of. Every Prince Hall Mason will be proud of. So finally, the book was written, and Cornell University Press sent me a great big old copy of the manuscript. Must have been 300 pages. Great big thing, you know. And so I took it home, and I read it, and I read it, and I read it, and I couldn't put it down. I could not put it down. I couldn't wait for the small hardcover book to be published so that I could either buy them for my friends, give them to my friends, or whatever. But what I did was, I spoke with Cornell University, the representative from Cornell University Press. After the book was published and printed in hardcover, there was a conference of Grand Masters coming up in 2013 in Ohio. I asked Cornell University Press if they would give me 55 copies of the book and mail them to me in Ohio at the hotel I was staying at so I could present them to all of the sitting Grand Masters. Wow, talk about a great day. Now, I was only going to be in Ohio for a couple of days because my wife and I had to get back because we had nieces graduating, so I was there, and they allowed me to come in on a Thursday afternoon. So I had all the books. Now, the only person that knew that these books were available was the president of the conference, and he was a sitting Grand Master from Texas. So anyways, I had the books in there, and I got up, and I gave like a 10-minute spiel about the book and so forth, and spoke to them, and I said to them finally, and for each and every one of you Grand Masters, I have a gift for you to take home to your jurisdiction. And I want you to take this book home to your jurisdiction, and I want you to share it with each and every brother in your jurisdiction. I don't mean by letting them share the book, but I'm going to give you information of how they can order the book. I did all that, and now I have a presentation to make to each and every one of you sitting Grand Masters. And I remember there was a young man by the name of Gerald Thaxton, who was our Grand Secretary, who was one of the helpers who helped pass out this book. Well, we passed out the book, and they were so happy and so enthused. We sat, after I passed out the book, we talked about it for a minute. Even though they had a little bit of history about the book, they hadn't read it, of course. So the president of the Conference of Grand Master declared that All Men Free and Brethren would be the book that we would look up to as far as the Conference of Grand Masters is concerned. And that book right now is the book that we stand by in the Conference of Grand Masters. 13 years. It was worth the wait. Believe you me. And I personally, right now that I have the opportunity, I want to thank Peter and Stephen and Beverly, and especially to Peter, who has taken many of my phone calls. We've talked together 1,000 times, and has assisted me and helped me when I had so many problems in trying to think of how to write a foreword. Never did it before in my life, you know? And the first one that I sent to him, he said, Les, what you're doing is, this is a history. You need to put something out there that is going to represent the book and Freemasonry. The foreword has been written. It's out there. I read it over and over and over. You know, I just enjoy it. But let me say this. Again, thank you, Peter and Stephen and Beverly, for all that you have done. The book is out there. It's our responsibility now to make sure that everybody has a copy. And for those of you that are going to purchase a copy of the book today, we have it here in hardcover. The book is $35. You know, it's the same price that it was when it first came out. It hasn't increased. And during the reception, there's going to be a book signing where Stephen, Peter, and myself would be more than happy to sign your book for you. Again, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming this evening. Most worshipful Grandmaster Mead, my buddy, my friend, you know. I'm glad that we talk a lot. You know, he knows that if he has any problems, if I can help him straighten them out, that I will, you know. Masonry is a part of my life. I am the 66th Grandmaster. I have sat as Grandmaster longer than any other modern day Grandmaster. Grandmasters in Massachusetts sit only for 2 years. I was fortunate enough, or maybe unfortunate, because the Grandmaster before me passed away in office, and I was able to take over as acting Grandmaster from August of 2005, and I was installed in December of 2005, and sat as Grandmaster for 3.5 years, which I enjoyed every single bit of it. And Grandmaster Mead knows that I'd go back. I would do it again. If I had to. If they needed me, I would go back. But anyways, I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing me to speak this evening. I probably spoke too long, but thank you very much for coming, and keep in mind, the book is available. Okay?
On June 24th, 1828, the Prince Hall Masons of Boston convened to celebrate one of the most hallowed events in the annual Masonic calendar, the Festival of St. John the Baptist. The master of the lodge, John Telemachus Hilton, had been selected to give the leading address of the day. As he opened his oration, he duly observed the magnitude of the occasion. Gentlemen and brethren of the mystical band, the rolling wheels of time have on this day brought us round another anniversary festival of the nativity of our great head and pattern, St. John the Baptist. You, brethren, have wisely anticipated the solemnities of the day by assembling yourselves within these consecrated walls of the Supreme God, publicly to commemorate the virtues of him, that is, St. John the Baptist, who was ornamental to our art and an adorning pillar of piety. This event could not happen in just any local space, a tavern, a storefront, someone's parlor. It had to occur in a space of special sacral meaning to the community, bounded by the consecrated walls of the Supreme God. Boston's Prince Hall Masons knew they could gather themselves in no more hallowed public space than right here, where we are now gathered, the African Meeting House. The weighty content of the oration required just such an auspicious setting. On this particular festival day, Hilton proclaimed that the Prince Hall Masons of Boston and beyond must, quote, commence a new era in the moral world, unquote. That on their fraternal shoulders, in particular, fell the responsibility to lead the regeneration of a nation where white American Masons abrogated their Masonic vow to pursue universal fellowship and love by rejecting fraternity with African American Masons and, in common with most white Americans, embracing slavery and racism. In 1828, Hilton proclaimed that black Freemasons would be among the vanguard seeking to overthrow the racial bondage and inequality so deeply intertwined in the fabric of the nation. That Hilton inaugurated this new moral and Masonic mission at the African Meeting House in 1828 would have surprised no one in Boston, black or white. From the opening of its doors in 1806, the African Meeting House and the Prince Hall Masons would nurture a strong and felicitous bond grounded in Protestant Christianity, Freemasonry, and racial justice and equality. The African Baptist Church was organized in Boston in 1805 under the auspices of Reverend Thomas Paul. Almost as soon as the church itself was organized, plans were launched to erect a building to house the congregation. Cato Gardner, an elderly and respected African American, spearheaded the drive. Yet Gardner was more than a devout Baptist. Since perhaps the late 1770s, he had been a dedicated Mason in Prince Hall's Lodge. In 1808, soon after the completion of the church, the black Masons relocated their lodge, quote, to the corner of Rose Lane near the new brick meeting house, unquote, attesting to their affinity with the church and its broader non-Masonic community. The African Meeting House provided the space for Boston's first black school. By 1809, the school had secured its first black instructor, Prince Saunders, a highly educated and ambitious young man from Lebanon, Connecticut, just down the road from Beverly's Colchester, Connecticut, and Bacon Academy. Yet he also served to bind the meeting house and the Masons ever closer. That same year, he was initiated into the lodge and soon became its recording secretary. A likelihood exists that the lodge rented space in the 1810s at the meeting house for its functions. The lodge paid rent to the meeting house for space in 1821, I know that for a fact, and well may have done so earlier and not recorded it. Throughout this era, numerous Masonic celebrations and parades occurred or began at the African Meeting House. But by 1821, the bonds between the two institutions became even more explicit. Reverend Thomas Paul was initiated into the craft, and according to one chronicler, became, quote, the power behind the throne at the lodge. He was never a Grand Master, though he was one of the older members of the lodge then. With Paul's induction into the lodge, the cord uniting the Prince Hall Masons with the meeting house and its African Baptist Church only strengthened. Reverend Paul was critical to nurturing the rise of John Telemachus Hilton, probably the single most important leader of the Prince Hall Masons in the pre-Civil War era. The young Hilton arrived in Boston in 1821 from Pennsylvania, and Paul soon took him under his wing. In 1823, he was initiated into the lodge. By 1827, he was raised to master of the lodge. Through the 1850s, he helped oversee the greatest expansion of black Freemasonry the fraternity had yet realized in the northern states of America. Hilton also joined the African Baptist Church soon after his arrival and zealously dedicated himself to it. He would long serve as the clerk and as the leader of the missionary wing. Thus, in June 1828, as Master Hilton approached the podium for his oration, the very podium from which we're speaking this evening, he was particularly well positioned to fuse the Prince Hall Masons' more explicit public advocacy of abolitionism and racial equality with the sacral mission and space of the African Meeting House. He succeeded. From that point forward, the African Meeting House became the most important organizational space for this new and bolder activism that he forwarded with other African Americans, Masonic and otherwise. For example, Hilton and numerous other Black Masons were original, enthusiastic supporters of William Lloyd Garrison and his radical anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator. In February 1831, a month after Garrison began publication, Hilton allied with numerous other local African Americans, many of them Masons, to gather the community at the African Meeting House and denounce the plan of the American Colonization Society to remove all free Black Americans to its West African colony, Liberia. As the clerk for the African Baptist Church, Hilton called for a fast day for, quote, all colored churches throughout the United States on September 28, 1831, to express sympathy for Nat Turner and his recent rebellion in Southampton, Virginia, as well as for our innumerable, quote, afflicted brethren groaning so sadly under every species of cruel barbarity throughout the South. Perhaps such boldness charged one nervous commentator later that year to aver that Black Masons, quote, of all others, are most forward in promoting the spirit of revolt among the slaves. To them, I attribute the late melancholy occurrences in Southampton and other places, unquote. At the Meeting House, Hilton helped organize the annual celebrations of emancipation in the British West Indies after 1836. In 1833, from the church's pulpit, he eulogized William Wilberforce, the British abolitionist so closely associated with that emancipation. Hilton aided numerous temperance and literary societies who met here. His wife was a treasurer for one of them. He long served on the board of the managers of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society and hosted innumerable anti-slavery events at the African Meeting House. When an effort was made in 1848 by several local blacks to create a separate all-black anti-slavery society, Hilton opposed it. He was the president of the committee, which included numerous other white and black abolitionists that fought successfully from 1844 to 1855 to dismantle the racially segregated Smith School in Boston and integrate the city's public schools. In October 1850, Hilton was one of the principal authors of the Declaration of Sentiments of the Colored Citizens of Boston on the Fugitive Slave Bill, which vehemently condemned the bill and encouraged the continued flight of the enslaved from the South. In what was called an eloquent and earnest speech he gave at the Meeting House upholding the Declaration, he challenged all people of color whose liberty was threatened to, quote, not be taken alive, but upon the slave catcher's head be the consequence, unquote. Without the Prince Hall Masons and the African Meeting House, many fugitives who fled to Boston would have lacked refuge and protectors. Numerous other Black Masons in their lodges in the northern states replicated this active engagement with abolition and community improvement as well. Nothing better embodied this connection of Boston's Prince Hall Masons with the community at large than their consistent gathering together as a whole at the African Meeting House, the institutional heart of antebellum Black Boston. While Hilton and his Masonic brethren always refreshed their special Masonic bonds within their lodge amid its enlightening rituals and fraternity, their commitment to their broader afflicted community was equally strong and was most manifest in the activism they centered at the African Meeting House. One admirer summarized the life of Hilton in 1862 as one filled with, quote, ardor, zeal, and constancy, not only for what would benefit the craft, but the community at large. John T. Hilton and his Prince Hall Masonic brethren stand witness to the fact that not only did they make the lodge their home over the decades before the Civil War, they made the African Meeting House their home as well, rooting themselves within it and helping to animate its own great moral and sacred mission. Thank you.
Dr. Hinks and I, like our historian colleagues in the volume, are professional historians. There are things that we can know and understand about African American Freemasonry, and there are things we cannot. And I want to say a few words tonight about each one of those. First, about what we can know, and I'm going to just pick up where Peter left off at the Civil War. Boston's African-American Masons continue to play critical roles in the struggle against slavery and for equal citizenship during and after the Civil War. Some of the men of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge took leading roles recruiting men for the 54th Massachusetts and its sister units. Grandmasters such as Lewis Hayden and John J. Smith and leading Masons including John S. Rock all played important roles in that recruiting effort. Hayden, who was close to Governor John Andrew, perhaps most of all. He urged the men of Boston and other cities to enlist. He used his connections with Masons across the North to recruit leading men from other communities into the black regiments. In this very hall, he urged them to take part in a war that he believed would bring about the destruction of slavery, the state into which he had been born, and the dawn of universal humanity, the goal of his life. Other men of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, including Hayden's friends, saw their duty differently. Robert Morris was disappointed to learn that black men would not be permitted to serve as officers in the black regiments, and then, later, crushed to find that they were not to be paid the same wages as white soldiers. Morris used his prominence to work against enlistment, urging black men not to serve the Union until it promised them full equality. And in this duality between recruitment and resistance to recruitment, I think we see two key roles that Prince Hall Freemasonry has played across United States history. First, extending a hand to the rest of the nation, seeking full participation in the life of the Republic, while at the same time always insisting on full equality as the measure of that relationship. After the war, Boston's Freemasons headed south to help organize lodges, churches, schools, and political clubs among the freed people. Lewis Hayden was again at the forefront, believing that the sacred bonds of Masonry could instill trust and confidence, as he put it, among people who had just come out of slavery, enabling them to work together to build a new world. That job was harder even than he imagined. Freemasons, like many other people, had believed and hoped that the end of slavery would erase the stigma that attached to blackness, that the dawn of universal freedom would quickly be followed by the day of unity and universal equality. But instead, the post-war years brought attacks from without and divisions within. White terror weakened and finally destroyed democracy in the former slave states. But the dream continued. In 1876, Richard Theodore Greener, Prince Hall Mason, a graduate of Harvard, protege of Lewis Hayden, spoke hopefully to the brethren of Savannah, Georgia. He, quote, "In that state where true Masonic light is shed, there will be no longer barbarian, Scythian, bound nor free, but Israelite and Gentile, black and white, Turk and Christian, king and peasant, shall sit as equals and brothers." For Greener, as for Hayden, true Masonic light was the solvent that would bring the brotherhood of man. That remained a dream, but during the hard years of Jim Crow, the work and vision of Freemasonry helped keep such freedom dreams alive. This society with secrets helped sustain African-American organizational life across the South in an era when black people's collective work was greeted with suspicion, hostility, and violence. By the 1920s, leading Freemasons were demanding anti-lynching legislation and were leading the return of African Americans into elected office. By the time the post-World War II freedom movement began to win its victories, black Freemasons' contributions to it were already profound. NAACP Legal Director Thurgood Marshall, later Justice of the United States Supreme Court, praised Prince Hall Mason's financial and other contributions to his cause. "Whenever and wherever I needed money and did not know of any other place to get it," Marshall said, "Prince Hall Masons never let me down." And where did the Southern Christian Leadership Conference establish its headquarters? In the office of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia. The work of equality is far from finished within the precincts of Freemasonry as in the nation and the wider world. But a decade ago, I caught a glimpse of what Freemasonry might still bring to that project. On the morning of May 10th, 2003, officers of Massachusetts leading black and white Masonic bodies, long separate, assembled together to heal the breach that had so long divided them. First at Paul Revere's tomb in the old Granary burial ground, then at Copp's Hill, where the monument to Prince Hall stands, the men acknowledged their fraternal ties to one another. I stood at a distance that morning in the old Granary burial ground, observing as the ceremony began. And beside me stood a stranger, an African-American man of about my age, whom I did not know, but we immediately recognized one another by the signs and aspect of our own craft to be historians. And we made friends on that basis. We recognized each other by the place we had found ourselves, the way we were observing, and together we watched the black and white brethren at the two grave sites. At first, they stood in separate groups, black and white. But as the morning wore on and as the group moved up the hill to Prince Hall's grave, we saw them begin to mingle. Finally, after the final ceremony was concluded beside Prince Hall's marker, the men began to enthusiastically share Masonic greetings across the color line that had so often set them at odds. The spirit of the moment was intoxicating. One man, seeking further fellowship, briefly ventured toward me and my companion, his hand outstretched. After a moment, though, he seemed to realize that whatever we were not Masons. He smiled, inclined his head graciously, and turned back toward his brothers. And my friend and I turned and smiled at one another because we understood what history had just been transcended and what history had been made. We understood some of what we'd seen, but we did not understand it all. Dr. Hinks and I and our collaborators in the volume, we cannot claim to understand it all, and this is the last part of my remarks. There is a part of your history that those of us who are not Freemasons cannot know. We hear our sources. We hear men like John T. Hilton, David Walker, Lewis Hayden, speak of brotherly love and universal equality. We watch them put those commitments in practice over 2 centuries of fraternity and struggle. But our knowledge of the ties that bound them stops where their ritual lives begin. And perhaps this is not something that historians like Peter and I should seek to explore, at least not in the ways we usually practice our craft. But one thing I've learned from the time I've spent learning about these brethren, and especially Lewis Hayden, is that they did not see Masonry as instrumental. It was not something that they participated in order to get something else done. It was a good in and of itself. They invested their hopes and dreams in Masonry. They believed its bonds could knit together communities shattered by slavery, war, and hardship. They believed that Masonry's bonds could even be a balm to the wound of racial division. And I think they believed this because they had experienced that healing and transforming power within the lodge itself. Dr. Hinks and I will probably never be able to communicate that experience. So even as we claim some knowledge of the order and its past, we know there's much that will never be spoken. Moments of power and community that created lasting ties, moments that are beyond our poor power to capture in words. Those moments belong to the Freemasons themselves. And it's with appreciation of that silent power and its mark on our shared history that I conclude.
I can speak with some authority. I've spoken to both of these gentlemen and David Walker. As regards Walker and his relationship to Freemasonry, I have written a book on David Walker, which came out in 1997. And one of the first talks I gave on David Walker was here at the African Meeting House in April 2000. If I could rework significant sections of that book, without question, I would rework what I had to say about David Walker and make about David Walker and his relationship to Freemasonry, and if anything, make that relationship even more central to creating the man with the understanding that Walker had, and box that sentence. But Freemasonry was central to who David Walker was as an anti-slavery activist, as a a Methodist, and as someone who is zealously dedicated to racial justice, I think that he, once he entered the lodge here in Boston about 1826, I think that experience, if anything, made him more zealously dedicated to human rights and to the smashing of all the impediments that existed for black people in this country from that time on. You want to say something?
Yeah. When David Walker and the Masons of his generation encounter the United States, they encounter a world in which churches are closed to them or segregate them, in which the Constitution doesn't appear to apply to them, the Declaration of Independence doesn't appear to apply to them. All of the principles that are supposed to guide the nation and their civic, political, and spiritual lives toward equality and brotherhood are betraying those trusts. And somehow in Masonry, they find a way to imagine a way out of that bind, a way to imagine that they can belong to something not just national, but international, worldwide and world historical. That this will not only be a place where they can be equal, but a place where they can turn the world into the thing that they need it to be, which is a place where all people can be equal. That's a tremendously powerful thing for them at that moment.
Well, I really can't tell you the history of how it started, but I know that for one thing, back in the days of Prince Hall, there were Masons that were already in the Caribbean. There were Masons that were in Haiti. Even though that the African Americans were the first here in America, but Masonry had been going on long before that. The Grand Lodge of Barbados in the Caribbean, it's a Prince Hall Grand Lodge. We have, as a matter of fact, let me just go just for a minute to let you know that in Massachusetts, we have 3 subordinate lodges in Trinidad and Tobago, and we had 4, but now we have 3. We also have a subordinate lodge in Spain, and we have a subordinate lodge in the Netherlands. That all belong to Massachusetts. We also have a subordinate lodge in New Hampshire and a subordinate lodge in Maine. We have, and maybe I'm getting off the program, but I'm just giving you a little history of Prince Hall Masonry here in Massachusetts. We have 26 subordinate lodges in Massachusetts. I think it's 26, okay? But we are very, very, very close to all of the Prince Hall Grand Lodges in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas, in Barbados, in Trinidad and Tobago. Very, very close. As a matter of fact, there is a Grand Master, a Prince Hall Grand Master that serves in each one of those Grand Lodges in the Caribbean. Maybe once a year, wherever that's going to be held. Plus, we have a lot of brothers from Barbados, from Jamaica, from all parts of the Caribbean that are part of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge here in Massachusetts. You know, we have quite a few. So we appreciate your grandfather being a Prince Hall Mason, and hopefully that his grandchildren, grandsons will follow in his footsteps.
I'll just say a few things about that, the sort of the international dimension of Prince Hall Masonry. One of the roots for the creation of the lodge by Prince Hall in Boston was connections with the Grand Lodge in England that are really cemented by black sailors who are traveling from Boston and other ports in the Northeast to England. It's Prince Spooner, who, a sort of controversial figure in early Prince-Hall Freemasonry, who's responsible, I believe, for bringing the original charter over from London. And I think this dimension of sailors of color who are traveling on the Atlantic, who have relationships of whatever sort to nations and colonies throughout the Atlantic, play an important role in the movement of Freemasonry in the Atlantic world, in this revolutionary late 18th century and later on in the 19th century. So I think these figures are yet to be studied more closely in the role that they play in both forging the early black Freemasonry and extending it. Real quickly, I think that the Prince-Hall Masons had a particularly strong, and this is again tied in with black maritime people, had a particularly strong relationship with the Masonry that emerges in Haiti after it becomes Haiti, which is in 1804. Prior to 1804, it still remains a French colony called Saint-Domingue. The Masonry, interestingly enough, that develops in Haiti is a Masonry that's under the Grand Orient of France. It's not under the English system. The Grand Orient of France, for one thing, admits women from the 18th century, but also admits people of color. And doesn't have any problem with that, okay? And so the Masons in Haiti after 1804 are overwhelmingly people of color. And one in particular, very interesting, I could go on, let me just say, because there's actually another very rich realm that needs to be explored much more substantially. But there's a number of Prince-Hall Masons coming out of Boston and other eastern seaboard cities like Philadelphia and New York who go to Haiti in the 1820s. There's a large immigration movement that Haiti is the leader of Haiti at that time, Jean-Pierre Boyer, is encouraging, and many black Masons on the eastern seaboard support. I think there's a very fruitful interaction that occurs between them. One of the example of one of those interactions is that in 1824, Boyer, who's the Grand Master of Masonry in Haiti, separates from the French Grand Orient and calls that Grand Orient that exists in Haiti as the exclusive Grand Orient it has jurisdiction exclusively in Haiti. The French Grand Orient has no jurisdiction in Haiti. In other words, he separates, he declares an independence from the Grand Orient in France. John V. Hilton in 1827 will proclaim an identical independence from all other Masonic jurisdictions in the United States. It's a very important development, and I think Hilton came up with that idea as a result of what he learned about Masons doing. There's a lot to be learned about this exchange between Haitian and American Black Freemasonry in the early 19th century. I'll just respond briefly to that. I think I said a little something about that, a brief overview of it in my talk. The Prince Hall Masons were, at least in the northern part of the United States prior to the Civil War, were very, very actively involved in the abolition movement. And in fact, I don't really think you can understand the full spectrum of the abolition movement as it comprised both blacks and whites without understanding the enormous energy and impetus that the Prince Hall Masons brought to the movement. And I think that that's one thing three of us are striving to do with this book, is to make it abundantly clear that the Prince Hall Masons were placing them front and center in the abolition movement is critical to understanding that movement as a whole. So that's just evaluating them in terms of their role, say, between 1820 and 1860.
Whenever Black Civil War regiments marched south, 1863 to 1865, they're carrying Masons and Masonic work with them. That continues. Whenever missionaries head into the just free parts of the Confederate South, they're carrying Masonry with them. Wherever schools are being built, wherever people are being elected to office. In 1874, if I'm not getting the date wrong, there are two rival black candidates for the Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina. Both are Prince Hall Masons. Richard Cleves and Mark Delaney. It's so deeply woven into the black freedom struggle of the 19th century that you can hardly just roll the dice without finding somebody. It happens all the time. And what's more shocking is to find somebody who's not involved, a man who's not involved in Freemasonry. We've been misled in this because Frederick Douglass is notably not. And since much of what non-historians know about African Americans in the 19th century is about Frederick Douglass, we don't know about Freemasonry through him, so we don't know about it. But I think if you go a little deeper into the history, you find Freemasons everywhere. And it's very self-conscious inside.
Well, that seems an apt way to get
It is not easy, but it is this thing about like the work is bigger than us, right? And we made a commitment in August not to be silent anymore. Like we made a commitment to give up silence and to talk and fight back.